Have you ever wondered how close you've come to danger without even realizing it? At Shivering Vault, we take you there, one story at a time. But before you drift off, consider liking this video and commenting where you're watching from. Now, let's dive into these chilling stories. I wasn't expecting much when I decided to go camping. I just needed some time away from everything. The endless noise of the city, the constant work, the stress. I figured a weekend in the middle of nowhere would do me good. No people, no obligations, just me and the stars. At first, I had planned on going with some friends, but they all bailed. I didn't want to back out, so I went alone. The plan was simple: find a quiet spot, park my RV, set up camp, and just be. I found this campsite just off some back roads in Texas. It was far enough away from the nearest town to feel isolated, but not so far that it was dangerous. I figured I'd be fine. The worst that could happen was I'd get a little bored, right? I showed up, set up my RV, and got a small fire going. Nothing crazy, just a few logs to keep warm. I had brought a cooler with some food, a couple of beers, and some books to read. As the night crept in, everything started to feel calm. Too calm, almost. The trees were dead still, the wind barely moved, the kind of silence that feels unnatural after a while. But I shrugged it off. Maybe I was just getting paranoid. It's easy to do when you're alone. I spent the evening just relaxing. I ate a simple meal, nothing fancy, grilled a few sausages, had some chips. I opened a beer and stared into the fire, watching the flames flicker. I remember feeling weirdly calm despite how silent everything was. But then, around midnight, the silence started to feel oppressive, almost like I was waiting for something to happen. I kept hearing sounds in the distance, something snapping in the trees, but every time I turned around, nothing was there. A raccoon, a deer, something small. I kept telling myself it was nothing. By around 1 a.m., I was exhausted. I shut everything down, locked the RV, and crawled into bed. I remember thinking as I lay there, this is nice, too quiet, but nice. My eyes closed, and I fell asleep almost immediately. I woke up with a headache so intense it felt like someone had been drilling into my skull all night. It took me a second to focus on what was going on. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake the fog out of my head, but it wasn't helping. Then I noticed it. The RV door was wide open. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't opened it. I'd locked it before going to bed. I was sure of it. But there it was, the door standing wide open, the cool night air rushing in, the dim light from the campfire casting long shadows into the RV. I didn't hear anything. No footsteps, no voices. The world outside was still. It was as if the entire campground was holding its breath. But the headache, it was like nothing I'd ever felt before. I could barely think straight. I sat up in bed, my legs feeling like jelly. My mind was scrambling. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that I'd just forgotten to lock the door. But the deeper I thought about it, the more I realized something wasn't right. I stumbled out of bed, dizziness hitting me in waves. The air inside the RV felt heavier than normal, like it had been closed up for too long. I moved toward the door, trying to shake off the dizziness. When I reached the door, I looked outside. The campground was still empty, the fire burning low. The RV's steps creaked under my weight as I took a step out onto the dirt. Everything seemed normal at first, but I felt like I was missing something important. I looked back at the RV, and that's when it hit me. I didn't remember the door opening. Not once, not even a crack, and I definitely didn't leave it open. I went back inside, heart hammering. I checked everything. My wallet was missing. I was sure I'd left it on the counter next to the sink, but now it was gone. I checked the windows. They were all shut tight. The curtains were still drawn. No one had broken in through the windows. But that still didn't explain the door. I started to feel like I was going insane. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe someone had been here while I slept. Maybe they'd opened the door after I was knocked out. knocked out. That's when I remembered the headache. I hadn't just woken up with a headache, it was like someone had drugged me. A sharp, foggy feeling in my brain that wasn't just from sleep. It felt chemical. Something was wrong. I ran my hand along the vent above my head. The air was warm. A terrible thought struck me. What if someone had pumped something into the RV to knock me out? I started checking every vent in the RV, touching them one by one, feeling the warmth seep through. It hit me that I'd never paid much attention to the ventilation before. There were no signs of a break-in, no marks on the door, no smashed windows. But what if someone had been inside, watching me while I slept? What if they'd opened the door after I was drugged? I walked around the RV again, my mind racing. My legs felt shaky, like I hadn't eaten in days, like I was about to pass out. But something was making my blood run cold, the feeling that I wasn't alone, the sensation that someone had been here. And it wasn't just the open door. That's when I found the small bag under the bed. At first, I thought it was mine, just some gear I'd forgotten about. But when I opened it, I froze. Inside were items I didn't recognize. Gloves, rope, a flashlight, a small knife, a bag that looked like it could fit a person's head in it. It was all too planned. This wasn't just a robbery. Someone had been preparing for something worse. My stomach dropped. I didn't know what to do. I could feel my pulse thumping in my ears. I wasn't safe here. Whoever had been in my RV could still be nearby, watching. I grabbed my phone. No signal. Panic surged through me. I needed to get out. I ran to the RV's engine, praying that it would start, but it sputtered and died. I tried again. Nothing. Whoever had been here had tampered with it. My legs felt weak, but I knew I had no choice. I had to run. I bolted out the door into the cold night with no clear direction, just away from the RV. My body was sluggish, my brain foggy from whatever they'd drugged me with, but I couldn't stop. I heard footsteps behind me, too quiet to pinpoint, but they were there. I could feel them. Whoever it was following me. I kept running, my heart pounding, sweat trickling down my forehead despite the chill. I had no idea how far I'd gone or if I was even heading in the right direction. But then I saw headlights. A truck. I waved my arms like a maniac, and thank God they stopped. The driver helped me into the truck, and I was barely able to speak, my head still throbbing with that unrelenting pain. I tried to tell him what happened, but it was all jumbled. He just listened, confused but kind enough to take me to the nearest town. The police took my statement, but they didn't believe me. They said I was probably just disoriented, that I had overreacted to a simple break-in. They didn't find anything near the RV. No signs of a struggle. No footprints. Nothing. I don't go camping alone anymore. I never thought much about camping alone. I'm the type who craves solitude now and then, the kind of person who finds peace in leaving the world behind for a while. When life back home becomes overwhelming, a trip into the wilderness always seems like the perfect escape. No phone calls, no emails, just nature and quiet. So, when the stress of my life got to be too much, I decided to rent an RV and head into the heart of Texas hill country. The reviews for the campground I found were glowing. Peaceful, remote, with a handful of other campers scattered across acres of forest. It sounded perfect, like exactly what I needed to clear my mind. I arrived just before sunset, the orange glow of the dying sun casting long shadows across the narrow, winding dirt road leading to the campsite. The place was more isolated than I had expected. Maybe 3 or 4 other RVs scattered around the grounds, some tucked away in the trees. I parked my RV near the edge of the woods, feeling comforted by the distance from the others. I liked it that way. The quiet, the space. The campsite was alive with the sounds of evening, the chirping of crickets, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. I sat outside making a simple dinner, grilled chicken, some canned beans, and a cold beer. The sky above was clear, the stars starting to prick the velvet black of the night. I locked the RV doors before heading inside around 11 p.m. There was something about the stillness of the night that felt oddly comforting, like the world had paused for a moment, just for me. I crawled into bed, the warmth of the blankets surrounding me, and drifted into a deep sleep. But then came the noise. It wasn't loud at first, just a soft click, like something shifting in the dark. I stirred, blinking into the darkness of the RV. For a moment I convinced myself it was nothing, maybe just a branch scraping against the metal. But then I heard it again, clearer this time. The unmistakable sound of the latch on the RV door being disturbed. My heart immediately started to race. I had locked the door, or at least, I thought I had. The uncertainty gripped me. Could I have missed it? Did I lock it properly? But hearing that sound again, the click of the latch, made the air in my lungs tighten. I wasn't imagining it. Someone was trying to get inside. I lay there, motionless, trying to steady my breathing, but every instinct in my body screamed that something was terribly wrong. Was it an animal? Maybe a raccoon or a deer? But no, that sound was too deliberate, too precise. The door. Someone was tampering with the door. My mind was spinning, each second stretching out like hours. The only thing within reach was a small flashlight sitting on the counter next to the kitchen. Not much of a weapon, but it was all I had. I didn't want to move, but I knew I had to. If someone was outside, I needed to know who they were. But at the same time, I couldn't shake the nagging fear that making a sound, anything, would make things worse. I lay still, barely breathing, as the sound of the latch clicking grew louder, closer. I could feel the darkness pressing in, thick and heavy, like it was alive, watching me. My body was frozen, but my mind was running a mile a minute. What if it's another camper? Why wouldn't they knock? Why would they open the door so quietly? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to move. My hands were trembling as I reached for the flashlight. My pulse thundered in my ears, each beat like a drum of panic. I grabbed it, turned it on, and made my way toward the door. Every creak of the RV floorboard seemed to echo through the small space, louder than the last. My breath was shallow, caught in my throat. I was trying to keep quiet, trying to stay as still as possible, but I felt like every movement could betray me. When I reached the door, I paused. My heart slammed against my chest. My thoughts scattered like leaves in the wind. I had to look, but part of me didn't want to. What if the man was right there, staring in through the window? What if he was already inside? I took a deep breath, and then I glanced through the small, frosted window next to the door. The moonlight was dim, barely enough to make out anything. But there, in the shadowed distance, I saw a figure. It was standing too still, like a statue, and the feeling of dread that washed over me was immediate and overwhelming. My heart thudded in my chest as I realized the door was slightly open, just enough for a person to squeeze through. My blood ran cold. Could it be another camper, I wondered, someone who'd gotten lost or drunk and decided to stumble onto my RV? But why hadn't they knocked? Why had they opened the door so quietly? And why did it feel like I wasn't supposed to see them? Then, without warning, the figure moved. I froze. There, standing halfway inside the RV, was a man. His face was so close to the window that it seemed to press against the glass, his eyes wide and unblinking, staring straight at me. The coldness of his gaze chilled me to the bone. It was like he had been waiting for me to notice him, to look into those eyes. I could feel my breath catch in my throat. Every instinct in me screamed to run, to scream, to fight back, but my body didn't move. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. He didn't say a word. He didn't make a sound. He just stood there watching me, his ragged jacket swaying slightly in the breeze. His hair was matted, dirty, and his face was gaunt, hollowed by something darker than fatigue. There was something wrong about him. Something that wasn't just unsettling, it was dangerous. His eyes weren't wild or panicked. No, they were far too calm. It was the calmness of someone who knew exactly what they were doing, someone who was hunting. I didn't know who this man was, but every fiber of my being screamed that he wasn't here to talk. He wasn't here for a friendly chat. I had to act. I grabbed the flashlight, flicking it on, and shined it directly into his face. The light illuminated his features in stark detail. His eyes reflected something more than madness, something colder, like a predator staring down its prey. The light caught the sweat beading on his forehead, his uneven breath coming in ragged gasps. There was a flicker of recognition, but it didn't make sense. Had I seen this man before? Was he someone from the news? I could barely think straight. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I could feel the blood rush to my face. "Who are you?" The words came out of my mouth in a hoarse whisper. I didn't know why I even asked. What good would it do? He didn't seem interested in answering. He didn't respond. Instead, his hand reached toward the door, slowly pushing it open wider. It creaked like a warning, like an invitation. My mind raced. What the hell was I supposed to do? I couldn't stay here. I couldn't run either, not with him blocking the doorway. But I couldn't wait for him to come inside. I scanned the RV, my mind scrambling for any escape plan. My phone was on the kitchen counter, but it was too far to reach. If I moved toward it, he might see it as a signal that I was trying to run. I couldn't risk that. And then, just as panic started to take over, I heard it. I heard it. A rustling. Something in the trees. A truck engine. A distant hum growing louder, closer. I wasn't alone. I rushed to the driver's seat, my body moving on pure instinct. I grabbed the keys from the dashboard, feeling them slip between my trembling fingers. With a desperate jerk, I shoved them into the ignition and twisted. The engine roared to life, breaking the silence with a deafening growl. The man outside flinched violently, his body jerking back from the door, as if the sound had physically struck him. I saw him drop low, crouching down just outside the RV's threshold, trying to shield himself from the sudden noise. His hands shot up in a defensive reflex, but as he did, something small, maybe a rock or some tool, clattered to the ground, the sharp sound echoing in the still night. The noise was enough to shake him, but it also bought me a precious second. Before he could react further, I slammed the RV into drive and floored the gas. The tires screeched on the dirt road, and the RV lurched forward, throwing me back into the seat. I didn't look back. As the campground disappeared behind me, my hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I didn't know who that man was or how he'd gotten so close without me hearing a single sound. But the one thing I was certain of, he wasn't just lost in the woods. He was hunting. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't woken up. It was the second night of my trip, deep in the heart of nowhere, Texas. The kind of quiet that seems unnatural. So thick it swallows up sound, making even the wind feel like it's holding its breath. I'd been out there for a couple of days, parked on a little secluded spot I found through a camping app. Just me, my RV, and the vast, empty sky. No people, no noise. Just the occasional rustle of wind through the sparse trees and the far-off chirping of crickets. Exactly what I needed to get away from everything. I thought I had no neighbors. This place was remote, miles from the nearest road, with a dirt track barely wide enough for a single car leading me to it. The land was flat and desolate, just dirt and dry brush stretching in every direction. A few scraggly trees bent under the wind, and the occasional cactus or rock stuck out from the ground like forgotten relics. It was isolation in the best way possible. Peaceful. Remote. The kind of place I could disappear into. After dinner, I cleaned up and settled outside with a beer in hand, watching the sun set behind the horizon. The sky went from brilliant orange to deep purples and blues. I let the cool air fill my lungs, trying to soak in the stillness. The kind of quiet you only get when there's no one around. I was enjoying it. But then, I noticed it. Out of nowhere, a van appeared. It was a plain white van, and it was parked about 100 yards away, partially hidden behind some overgrown brush and tall patches of grass. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was a camper, right? Maybe someone else had found this little patch of wilderness and decided to set up a bit off the trail. But something didn't sit right. I hadn't heard the van approach. Not a single sound, and the road was so isolated that it was impossible for anyone to sneak up without making noise. Yet, there it was. It felt like it had been there for hours, waiting. I squinted into the fading light, trying to make out the details. The van was parked at an odd angle, like the driver was deliberately trying to stay hidden, out of view. I told myself it was nothing. People come out here all the time. But a tightness in my chest told me otherwise. I kept watching, unable to shake the uneasy feeling crawling over me. Maybe it was just me overthinking. Still, the van didn't move. It stayed there, parked in the growing darkness, like it was watching me. The sun finally sank, leaving a blanket of stars overhead. I finished my beer, trying to relax, but the tension wouldn't go away. Every few minutes I'd glance at the van, but it stayed perfectly still, almost too still. Something felt off. But how? I couldn't put my finger on it. By midnight, I was ready to turn in, but just as I was about to go inside, I saw movement by the van. A figure. Someone was walking around it, moving slowly, deliberately. It wasn't an animal. This was a person. My heart skipped a beat. I ducked behind the RV's window and tried to peer out through a crack in the blinds. My pulse was hammering in my chest. The figure moved cautiously, like they didn't want to be seen, and then they stopped, standing perfectly still. I couldn't make out any details, just the shape of a person moving around, and it didn't feel right. I stayed frozen, watching. The figure didn't do anything normal. No casual walking, no stretching. It was as though they were waiting for something or someone. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid. Maybe they were just out for a late-night walk. But my gut was telling me something was off. Something wasn't right. I could feel it in my bones. Eventually, the figure disappeared, and the night returned to silence. The van remained where it was, unmoving. I tried to push the thoughts from my mind and crawled into bed, locking the door behind me. But even with my eyes closed, I couldn't shake the image of that figure. My mind kept replaying the moment, and I couldn't settle. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. I froze. It wasn't an animal. It was human. Deliberate, and it was moving outside my RV, right up close. The footsteps stopped. My heart pounded in my chest. Someone was out there. Someone was here. And then it came. A soft knock. A slow, deliberate knock, knock, knock on the side of the RV. The sound was faint but unmistakable. My skin went cold. My heart stopped for a beat. Who would knock on my door out here? There was no one else for miles. I stayed absolutely still, barely breathing, praying whoever was out there wouldn't hear my heartbeat. But then the handle rattled. Not just a gentle rattle. This was hard. Aggressive. Someone was trying to force their way in. My blood went cold. The handle rattled again, more violently this time. It wasn't just testing the lock anymore. Whoever was out there was determined to get inside. They were yanking at the door like it was the only thing that mattered. Then came the banging. It was so loud it rattled the whole RV. Each strike felt like it was shaking the foundation of the RV. I could feel the metal warping under the force. The door itself was groaning in protest, as if it might give way at any moment. Something hit the side of the RV. Hard. A rock? A metal object? It crashed against the RV with such force it made me jump. They were throwing things now. They weren't just trying to get in. They were trying to break me. Break the RV. I gripped the blanket with white knuckles, my mind spiraling into panic. What the hell was happening? Who were these people? And then the door handle rattled again, this time with a twist. I could hear them pulling on it, desperately trying to get inside. The banging didn't stop. It only grew louder. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to act. I crawled toward the driver's seat, my legs trembling so badly I nearly collapsed. My fingers fumbled for the keys, the flashlight, anything. I started the engine, and the RV sputtered to life with a loud rumble. The sound felt like a gunshot in the stillness of the night, but it didn't matter anymore. I wasn't sticking around to find out what they were planning. I threw it in gear and floored the gas pedal, jerking the RV forward. The tires screeched against the dirt. The RV bounced over the uneven dirt path, swerving slightly as I tried to gain control, the engine roaring as I pushed it faster than I should have. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting to see headlights coming up behind me, but there was nothing. Still, I didn't feel safe. My hands were trembling so badly I almost lost grip of the wheel. It wasn't until I finally reached the main highway, miles away from that damn camping spot, that I slowed down. I tried to steady my breathing, but my pulse was still racing. My knuckles were white from gripping the wheel so hard. I didn't stop until I pulled into a gas station a couple of hours later. Even then, I didn't feel safe. I kept looking over my shoulder, checking the mirrors every few seconds. I could still hear the sound of that knocking on my door, that feeling of someone just waiting for me to slip up. I called 911. I told them what happened, gave them the details of the van, the people I saw, the banging, and the knocks on my door. But when they checked the area, they couldn't find anything. Those people were long gone. No trace, no sign of anyone at the campsite. I don't know who those people were or what they wanted, but I do know one thing. I escaped something worse. I was on my way to visit some friends up north, but didn't feel like paying for a campground for just a one-night stop. I'd seen this old gas station from the highway earlier that day. It looked pretty rundown, probably abandoned for years. But it had a big empty lot, and I figured it'd be a perfect, quiet place to park for the night. I'd save some money and avoid the hassle of a campsite. It was around 9 p.m. when I pulled off the highway and parked my RV near one of the rusted pumps. The place was covered in a thick layer of dust, and the little convenience store attached to the station had broken windows and a boarded-up door. The only lights were from my RV, and the occasional flickering of street lamps along the highway. I made sure to lock all the doors and checked the windows just to be safe. There was no real reason to be scared, but something about the place felt off. Maybe it was the fact that there was no one around, no cars, no lights, nothing for miles. I set up camp, made myself some dinner, and then let Charlie out for a walk around the parking lot. It was calm. Too calm. The only sounds were the occasional rustle of leaves and the soft wind. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every now and then, I'd glance up at the boarded-up gas station and wonder who had worked there in the past. Why had they just left? I brushed off the thought and settled in for the night, locking up Charlie and myself inside the RV. The only thing left was to relax with a movie and try to get some sleep. I don't know what woke me up. It was around 3 a.m. when I was jolted out of sleep. At first, I thought I had just dreamt something strange, but then I heard it again. A loud knock on the RV door. It was heavy, like someone was pounding on it with their fist. My heart raced and I sat up immediately, staring at the door in the dark. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. "Who is it?" Nothing. I waited for a response, but there was only silence for a few moments before the pounding came again, this time faster and more frantic. I glanced over at Charlie, who was lying at my feet. He didn't even move. He didn't bark, didn't make a sound. That's when I started to feel like something was really off. Why wasn't he reacting? I leaned closer to the door, staring through the small window, but I couldn't see anyone. I debated whether to open the door. Part of me thought maybe it was someone stranded or in trouble, but I'd heard enough stories about people being lured into bad situations. My gut told me something was wrong, but I still hesitated. Then the pounding started again, louder this time, followed by a voice. A man's voice. It was panicked, and I could barely make out what he was saying. "Help! Please, they're after me!" the man shouted. "Please, open up!" "Please!" I froze. I hadn't seen anyone else when I parked, and this guy sounded desperate, terrified even. I looked through the window again, but I still didn't see anyone. My gut told me something was wrong, but I couldn't ignore the sound of someone in distress. I figured I could at least crack the door open just a little to see what was going on. I cracked the door just a few inches. "Who are you? What's going on?" I asked, my voice still shaky. The man's voice sounded even more urgent now. "They're gonna hurt me, please. Just let me in." I felt a little bad at that point. I was alone in the middle of nowhere with only my dog for company. What if this guy was being chased? What if he was telling the truth? My hand hovered near the door, and I started to pull it open just enough to give him a glimpse of my face. Then, out of nowhere, Charlie let out a low growl, followed by a series of loud barks. I jumped back, startled, and looked around. Charlie was now on his feet, looking out the side window with his hackles raised. That was enough to make me pause. "Hey, calm down, Charlie," I whispered, trying to settle him, but I could tell he wasn't having it. Something wasn't right. I was starting to regret even opening the door this much. Just as I was about to shut it, I saw a shadow move from behind the gas station, a figure slipping into view. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe it was just someone walking by. But then I saw another shadow, and then another. They were closing in. I slammed the door shut just as I saw a group of men step out of the shadows, walking slowly toward the RV. Panic surged through me. My hands shook as I locked the door and threw the deadbolt. I grabbed my phone again, but before I could dial, the pounding started once more. But this time it wasn't just one person. There were knocks all around the RV. One on the front, one on the side, and I even heard footsteps on the roof. I turned off the lights, crouched down by the window, and listened. They were circling my RV. The man outside kept shouting for help, but now his voice sounded different. More controlled, almost rehearsed. Something about it felt off, but I couldn't figure out what. The minutes felt like hours. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't stay in there all night, and I couldn't leave either. Then, out of nowhere, the knocking stopped. Complete silence. I felt like I could breathe again, but I wasn't foolish enough to think it was over. I stayed crouched, trying to make sense of what was happening. A few more minutes passed, and then, suddenly, there was a soft, almost inaudible scratching on the door. I didn't dare move. That's when I heard the distinct sound of someone shuffling back to the gas station. I peeked out the side window again, and this time I saw it. Two figures walking away from the RV. They didn't seem to be in any kind of rush. No one was running. They were just walking casually back toward the shadows, like nothing had happened. That's when it hit me. This wasn't some random guy in trouble. This was a setup. They had been trying to lure me out of the RV. They wanted me to open the door so they could rob me, or worse. My heart was still racing, but I stayed inside, not daring to make a move until morning. When the sun finally started to rise, I didn't wait around to see if they would return. I packed up as quickly as I could and got the hell out of there. I never found out who those men were, but I'm sure of one thing: I'm never parking at an abandoned gas station again. That's it for today's tale from Shivering Vault. If you have a story worth sharing, drop it in the comments or send it our way. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your fellow thrill seekers. As always, the Shivering Vault thanks you for unlocking today's tale. Until next time, the vault awaits your return.